1940, we were on the gold standard. You couldn't really manipulate that much. You were still protected by the gold standard. As much as you wanted to manipulate, and kind of play the game, you couldn't fully. You could do it. Don't get me wrong. Joseph Kennedy mastered it in 20s, and he caused the whole 1929, all that stuff. Fine. But you still had a certain level of, the Fed still had a certain level of accountability to what they could do and what they couldn't do. Post, 1972, 73, gold standard, we're off of it, Nixon, whether you agree with it or not, to where we are today. Today, these guys have more levers to control and manipulate and play with than ever before. They're like, yeah, you know what, we're going to kind of go like this. Yeah, we're kind of going to go like this. Like the whole thing with the default. Like, could we really default? Back in the days, every time we wanted to spend something, and this is like a little over 100 years ago, you have to report it line by line. Then all of a sudden it becomes what? No, let's just increase the debt limit and let us do whatever we want to do with the money because we need it. And then you know what? Now we make it political. Now it becomes divisive. So I think they have so many different things to manipulate to put temporary Band-Aids on a catastrophic event that they could delay, that each time you're like, yeah, they delayed it for 5 more years. Yeah, they delayed it for 5 more years. Yeah, they delayed it for 10 more years. Do you agree or do you disagree with the fact that they have more manipulation today than before?
Oh, absolutely. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that there's a high probability that they default. If we go to this debt ceiling, I think that's going to be resolved for sure.
Isn't it always resolved?
Yeah, it's almost.
I'm
always
less
resolved.
concerned about the default. We'll get into that story. I'm more concerned about 15% unemployment Q1 of 2024.
Yeah, but so what you're saying is what Jerome Powell was saying is that, hey, I've got the tools for this.
Yeah.
Right? Well, okay. Did he have the tools for Silicon Valley Bank? He came out and created that new facility. I forgot what it's called, the bank fund lending facility or something like that. But then what did we have? Then we had First Republic. You see what happens? Every single time they come out and say that I've got a tool, we've got the tools. Don't worry, Adam, we've got the tools.
But
then you have another bank blow up and say, oh, well, I'm actually got to create more tools.
But it was more
always
to protect
behind
the
the curve.
insured, though. It was to protect the
Depositor,
not the.
No,
they
no,
never
no.
said they're going to protect the bank.
Equity holders got wiped out.
No. The Fed set up a facility so that those banks could unload those assets off their balance sheet at 100 cents on the dollar.
Well, they could borrow against it. They couldn't unload them. They could borrow against them at 100% of the dollar, but they would have to repay the loan. So it's not offloading.
But if they had a deposit flight, they could get those assets. They could get 100 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
They could borrow 100 cents on the dollar for the face value of those assets.
Correct.
Which they thought was their problem. But then you had First Republic. It didn't solve that problem. So what I'm saying is the Fed thinks they can solve these problems, but they're way behind the curve. And if they weren't behind the curve, they wouldn't have to do 45 rounds of quantitative easing, as an example. That's an example of their tool that they just have to do over and over and over again. Well, if it's so powerful, why do they have to do it 45 times? And if they've got all the tools for this, why do we still have these blowups when they have to create another tool? You see, the problem here is the global monetary system's broken. And if it wasn't broken, you wouldn't have a Silicon Valley Bank. Why couldn't they go to the discount window? Why couldn't they go to the repo market? Why couldn't they use all of these free market solutions? Well, not the discount window, but the repo market. Why couldn't they use these free market solutions where the other banks would give them the liquidity they need? Because there's too much counterparty risk in the system, because all the banksters know that the system's broken. And the only person that's willing to come in and clean up the mess is JP Morgan if they unload the risk of the asset side of the balance sheet they're incorporating onto the taxpayer. And they say, oh, by the way, in order for us to do this deal, we're going to have to borrow $50 billion from the taxpayer. And I don't know if you read that story, but they took an immediate gain of $2.6 million, and they're projected to make $500 million a year on that deal. JP Morgan is. And he didn't even have any out-of-pocket cost to do the deal. And he said, FDIC, you've got to insure 80% of the losses that I incur if I absorb this balance sheet. I mean, it's just like it's a freebie, but you see my point.
It's FDIC assisted. It's FDIC assisted rescue packages, which means the taxpayer is assisting JP Morgan and the bigger banks in rescuing the smaller banks. That's all it is.
Well, rescuing.
Not rescuing.
I'd
sorry.
call it a Christmas gift.
Taking over.
But that goes back to my question, though. That they will use every lever today because there is no accountability to manipulate any data point they want. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you go back to COVID, and everyone said, what you're saying is that there's a Fed put. There's a Fed put, George, so we shouldn't worry about it because they can kick the can further down the road. That's the argument.
That's what seems to be happening year after year.
I'm saying that in COVID, you could see that the Fed put expired because the Fed tried to come in with their put, and the market kept crashing. It just said, you know what? The Fed put's done.
How long did it crash, though?
What was it? Probably a week or two?
Yeah,
it was a week.
But
it kept crashing until the government came out.
That's the point.
Okay, so then we go from a Fed put to a government put. So the question now becomes, can the government act the same way that the Fed did? And if we are in an environment where inflation is 0% or they're worried about deflation, the answer would most likely be yes, assuming that the Democrats and the Republicans could get along. Who knows, right? But if we're in an environment where inflation is extremely high, is the public going to have the stomach for the Biden or any administration to come out and say, yes, we're going to do another $5 trillion when they realize that $5 trillion created this inflation that they're having to suffer through now?
You think the public's going to say no to it? You think the public's going to say no to it?
They're going to say yes. They're going to open up their arms and say, drop the stimulus.
I mean, it's not. Look, this is why the system that we have in America, in a way, it's broken because there's no such thing as earning the right to vote. Anybody, if you allow the majority to vote, this was a republic, gradually is becoming more of a democracy where the individual is not protected from the majority. It's a complete different concept of what America was truly founded for. That's my concern. My concern is there's way too many levers to bullshit the real economy and put a big-ass Band-Aid so everybody thinks, oh, things are great, guys. Let's go ahead and get reelected. Like even before midterms. What happened pre-midterms? Let's use our all the stuff that we've been having for oil and all that in our reserve. Guys, dump it. Use all of it.
Yeah, the
what do you mean use all of it?
Reserve.
Use all of it. $6, $5.50, $5, $4.50. Did you notice how in the last midterms, it's supposed to be a red wave. Boom, it's not. What happened? Well, we fixed the economy. Month later, back to the same shit again. So the point I'm trying to make to you isn't I disagree with you. Mm-hmm. I think we should be at 15%. I think the mess that we have should be a 15%.
You got to clean out the system.
But we have created zero accountability where we allow these guys to get away with murder because whoever controls the knob controls what they can do to delay the current issue. That's my concern. Yeah. We're aligned on the same page. I'm worried who's controlling the knob. That's my
Remember, before the elections, there was the recession, and then the definition of a recession was two quarters. Yeah. It's negative. But then they had 2 quarters, and then they said, no, but that's not a recession. That's not the definition of a recession. Okay, give us what the definition of a recession is. Well, that's not the definition of a recession. That was the manipulation.
Yeah.
The other big manipulation is not having to mark T-bills to market. In other words, when the interest rate goes up, not having to reduce the value of your holding on your balance sheet if you're holding government treasury bills.
Or mortgage-backed. Right?
Or mortgage-backed securities. Now, what that means is that that is manipulation. That is as if if I buy a property today, and I buy the property today for $1 million, and then the interest rate goes up and the property is only worth $600,000. If I say that I'm going to hold the property until the end of the mortgage, then you don't have to write it down. And that's manipulation because you don't know as a bank when your depositors are going to want their money back. And when that happens, you're going to have to sell these mortgage-backed securities or these T-bills to honor that.
Yeah.
And so the biggest manipulation and the biggest scam was not having to mark these things down.
Basically a counting trip where they were able to put an account called hold to maturity is what he's referring to. Yeah, it's a very good point.
All they had to do was say, we're going to hold these T-bills till maturity, and you could write them at the value of maturity, even though the value had decreased by 40%. So $1 million T-bill, if you held $1 million T-bill for 10 years, it was on your balance sheet at $1 million. Even though if you want to sell it in the open market today, you would get $600,000 or $700,000 for it. Because you said you were going to hold it to maturity. But if your depositors came and knocked on the door and said, we want our deposits back, well, you only got $600,000. You got to sell it. That is the manipulation.
Yeah, and that's why the Fed set up the facility.
Correct.
100 cents on the
Can
dollar.
I ask you guys a question? And this is kind of to Pat's point. Let me just be clear about the question. You're basically saying the system's broken. We got to, what do you say, end the Fed over here. Pat's basically saying somebody needs to be the bad guy. We're almost on a steroid or a heroin trip right now. We're inflating the economy. My question is, we know that the administration, whether it's the current Democratic administration under Biden or whether it's Trump, they don't want to be the bad guy because why? They'll not get reelected after the election cycle. So who needs to be the bad guy to get us out of this mess? If the system is broken, is it the Fed? Is it the secretary? Who is it going to be?
I think it goes back to Pat's point. That usually the way these things end is just slowly and gradually. The politicians try to kind of dodge responsibility, and the people that end up holding the bag are the poor and middle class. And that's what's very, because if you go through what Pat is saying, okay, they come out with more fiscal, that kicks the can down the road, but that doesn't mean that it fixes the economy.
Ever.
The economy continues to get worse. Because, like as an example, if you go back to purchasing power, right, we have had nominal wages go up. But if you look at the actual real wages since 2019, they've gone down when you adjust for inflation.
Yeah, they're getting destroyed.
That's right. So
we're eliminating middle America.
Even though you get these stimmy checks, let's say they do UBI next, right, to try to fix the problem. Well, yes, I agree with you that the poor and middle class are going to say, yeah, let's take that, let's take that, let's take that.
I think
but unfortunately, it's going to make them worse off over the long run because they're always the ones going to have to pay the price.
But if you're making 40, 50 grand a year and someone wants to send you money, you're never going to say no. We had the same conversation with Andrew Yang.
But you know what's crazy? Let me tell you.
Yeah.
So let's talk as capitalists here, okay? Who have somewhat won the business game. We're doing okay for ourselves, right? Okay. There's a community that'll say, well, that's easy for you to say because you made your money and now you got all the money and you want them to go because you want to see the market crash and all this other stuff because that's how you're going to make the money. First of all, a true free market capitalist is going to do good in a good market, a bad market, it doesn't matter. They're going to excel. So if you print more money and you send $5 trillion through the economy, I'm going to make money. Why? Because low and middle income families don't know how to spend money. It still comes to us.
Yeah.
If you don't give the money and you hold these politicians accountable, we're going to go through a season where all the fake capitalists are going to be filtered out and they're going to go out there and work for a true capitalist. And then we're going to have some real people that are doing it the right way, operate companies. And then people are going to say, I want to work there. I want to work there. Quite frankly, all these banks that are going out of business, you buy long-term 64%, 63% of your assets are sitting in that and rates are being called and a JP Morgan sitting on 14%, whatever their numbers was, 14, 15%. Some of you guys are playing the risky game. And guess what? You shouldn't be in business. There's guys that should be out of business. So for those that fall into this trap of, well, the rich people want the recession to hit, nobody wants the recession to hit. Nobody wants the money to be printed. We simply want accountability. Accountability gets rid of fake players in the game. There's way too many fake players in this game, and nobody knows who's who. It's going to take
You're
some kind of
not going to get accountability because I'm going to explain to you how it works. I live in South Africa. In South Africa, we used to have a reasonable economy. Today, we have 10 hours a day of no electricity. Okay, you have to understand, we have 10 hours a day every single day where the government switches off our electricity on a schedule. So you get 10 hours a day of no electricity.
For everyone across the country?
Across the country, 10 hours a day, you don't have electricity.
Whether you're rich, poor, middle income.
They just shut down, they say Fort Lauderdale, bang, they shut down Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale's gone from 2 to 6.
Now California, are you listening?
Now you think okay,
could be next.
You think that's cool. Like, okay, so the studio doesn't have lights, so you don't have lights at home. The traffic lights don't work, which means that the traffic becomes, you can't go to a meeting because there's no traffic lights. The stores can't operate. So now, you're asking for accountability. Let me tell you how this happens. There's no accountability. It just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse for the middle and lower class until something breaks.
Yeah.
When something breaks, how does the government respond? More money.
Just makes it rain.
What happens to the more money?
Flows to the top.
We have a period like COVID where everyone has more money.
Yeah.
The people that don't know how to save, the ones that aren't capitalists, the ones that aren't successful, spend all their money. And the cream rises higher to the top, and the people that are successful rise to the top.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.